It's a little past 6 in the evening. In the tax accounting firm where I work, the 6 employees, including part-time staff, have all left one after another. Once everyone was gone, I approached the lead employee, the equivalent of a CEO in a typical company, and asked Lucy what was all that about earlier. She then says, "I'll marry you." She declares this abruptly, effusively, and unilaterally, staring at me coldly. Let's turn back the clock about 5 years. At that time, I was hired fresh out of college by a certain mid-sized company. I didn't care what kind of business it was. All I wanted was a desk job. Because, whether it's raining, windy, snowy, or hot in the summer, I can stay in a comfortable place with air conditioning. So, I was assigned to the accounting department of that company as I wished. Despite being the accounting department, unlike large companies, we handled all back-office tasks. I didn't know anything about accounting, so I learned the ins and outs of the job from one of my seniors. This senior colleague was a charming woman. It's a common story, but we fell in love. She was quite ambitious, talking about getting her CPA or tax accounting license while working and starting her own firm. On the other hand, I didn't have much passion for accounting. Originally, I wasn't good with numbers either. So, I often got bored with work and struggled to stay awake. One day, she invited me to a lecture at a tax accounting school. A former student of the school, now a practicing tax accountant, was to share his experiences. I wasn't interested at all, but I went along, thinking of it as a date. However, as soon as the lecture started, I fell asleep snoring. She was embarrassed and angry, and I kept apologizing. I made all sorts of excuses, like I couldn't sleep well because I had a nightmare the previous night, but in the end, I inadvertently let slip my real thoughts. I just went because you wanted to. I had no interest in it today. I inadvertently blurted out my true feelings. A small matter became a big issue. This led to our breakup half a month later. Even after the breakup, our seats at work remained next to each other. She acted like she had completely forgotten about our relationship. In comparison, just being next to her became unbearable for me. So, I decided to quit the company. Through the breakup with her, my mindset changed. I became motivated, something I hadn't been before. I can do it if I put my mind to it. I won't waste my experience at the company. I'll become a full-fledged accountant. To become a tax accountant, first, you must pass the tax accounting exam. There are a total of 11 subjects on the exam, and the applicant must pass a total of 5 subjects, 2 required and 3 of the 9 elective subjects. You don't have to pass all 5 subjects at once. For example, you can take 1 subject each year for 5 years. After that, you register with the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants, and only then can you call yourself a tax accountant. So, after quitting my job, I decided to get by with part-time jobs without finding a new full-time job. I thought if I got a cozy job somewhere, I might give up on becoming a tax accountant. I'm not bragging, but I tend to be indecisive and weak-willed, so I thought I should cut off my means of retreat. For the shortfall in living expenses, I decided to live on my parents. I studied for the exam while working part-time. I worked hard, many times harder than I had studied for college entrance exams. And after 3 years, I passed the required 2 subjects. So, I decided to aim for passing the remaining 3 exams while studying in an environment where I could get hands-on experience with tax accounting. Then I applied for an assistant position with one of the tax firms. Most tax firms are sole proprietorships, but this one had just acquired corporate status. And the representative employee, or what would be called the CEO in a general company, was named Lucy. Including Lucy, it was a small office with about 5 employees. Lucy also conducted my job interview when I applied. I was 26, and she was 29. At first, I was nervous during the interview, clenching my fists on my lap, but seeing the relatively young Lucy relax me. When she began to read my resume across the desk, I relaxed and crossed my legs. Then she lifted her eyes from the resume and shot a sharp, stern look at my legs. Realizing that this was inappropriate, I immediately corrected my posture and sat properly on the chair. Man, I struggle with these types of people. She wasn't bad looking. In fact, she would be considered beautiful. She had a model-like face. Her nose slightly upturned seemed snobbish, but not in a bad way. But something about her was intimidating, or maybe too perfect, which I wasn't fond of. Do you get tired easily, Sam? I was puzzled by the unexpected question. Not really. I think I'm average. She explained that the job of a tax accountant requires concentration, and if one gets tired easily, it could lead to mistakes due to lack of attention. Now that I think about it, at my previous job, fighting off sleep was also part of the work. I joked, and she shot me the same sharp look as when I had crossed my legs. I regretted making unnecessary remarks and thought I had failed the interview. However, can you start from next week? Surprisingly, I was hired. Thus, I gained practical experience as an assistant to her and another accountant at her firm. I continued my studies for the tax accountant exam alongside it. I planned to pass the remaining 3 subjects one by one without pushing myself, over 3 years. And I set a new goal. That was to get married. Looking around, everyone was dating with marriage in mind, getting married soon, or already married. I was the only one without a partner and felt rushed. But more importantly, I believed that having a family, when I set up my tax accounting firm, would earn more trust from clients compared to being single. After working for over 6 months at her tax accounting firm, due to her policy, usually, if there was work left to be done, it would be turned over to the next day and everyone would go home on time. However, the busy period with overlapping client settlements was the exception. And on that day, even as the regular closing hour approached, work continued to drag on, and I couldn't concentrate on my work because I kept looking at the clock on the wall, worrying about the time. That's because, on that day, I had plans to attend a singles mixer after work. Sam, why are you only looking at the clock? You are not focused at all. After being scolded by her, I focused on the computer screen. I stopped looking at the wall clock. However, I kept looking at the time on the bottom right of the computer and couldn't get any work done. About 20 minutes past the closing time, I shut down my computer and walked over to her desk. Lucy, I'm sorry. I'll come in early tomorrow, so I'm leaving on time today. Well, if you continue like this, it seems you won't be of any help. You can go home, she said coldly, glaring at me with her usual sharp gaze. I rushed out of the office and hurried to the singles mixer venue. I slid into the party just in time for the start. However, once the party started, even during introductions and conversations, I couldn't comprehend what the other person was saying, nor could I grasp what I was expressing. My mind just wasn't in it. While working, I was preoccupied with the singles mixer, and at the mixer, I was worried about work. Ultimately, the party was a swing and a miss, and I went to bed early to prepare for the next day. Before I knew it, 2 years had passed. At work, I had made more mistakes and blunders than I could count on both hands. Each time, she bombarded me with her sharp, intimidating stare. My search for a partner was also going unsuccessfully, and I haven't even found a potential marriage partner. However, my tax accountant exams were going smoothly, with only 1 subject left after passing 2. One day, I was having dinner at a restaurant near the station while reading my textbook. Thinking I should jot this down, I attempted to pull out my usual notebook from my bag. Then, I realized I had left my notebook at the office. So, after finishing my meal, I went back to the office. I thought everyone had left, but the lights in the office were still on. As I was about to open the office door, "What do you mean, quitting all of a sudden?" I heard her yelling inside. I couldn't help but listen in on the scene. She was talking to the only other tax accountant male employee in the office beside her. I had heard that he closed his own office to join her when she incorporated her private practice. That's because a tax accounting firm cannot incorporate without having at least 2 certified professionals on staff. She and the male employee were both former colleagues and rivals who had trained at the same firm. After each started their own practice, they referred clients to each other. As I was standing in front of the door, unable to enter the office, the door was abruptly opened from inside. "What is it, Sam? What are you doing?" "Jess, well, I forgot something and came back to get it." He didn't really listen to my reply and quickly left. When I looked inside the office, our eyes met. Her eyes, far from the usual sharp glare, were timid, full of sorrow. "Did you hear the conversation? Heard it, or more like, it was audible?" I answered honestly, and she regained her usual intimidating stare, glaring at me. "So, you heard it, didn't you?" When I replied yes, she explained the situation. Influenced by her father, who was a tax accountant, she aimed for the same path from a young age. She became a tax accountant in her mid-20s and started her own practice. Her firm was thriving, and the client base was expanding. Then, she thought about incorporating her firm. Incorporation has its pros and cons, but she chose to incorporate. To incorporate a tax accounting firm, at least 2 certified accountants must be on staff. So, Lucy reached out to her old acquaintance. He was also keen on the idea and closed his own office to join Lucy's firm. Since Lucy initiated this, by mutual agreement, she became the representative employee. However, he, who was once the sole proprietor of his own practice, became increasingly dissatisfied with being a staff employee as 1 or 2 years passed and finally declared he wanted to go independent again. If that's the case, why not just revert the office back to a sole proprietorship? I said, pulling out a forgotten notebook from the drawer of my desk. Lucy leaned back in her chair, hands clasped behind her head, and replied, "But you see, there isn't much difference between a sole proprietorship and a corporation in tax accounting terms. However, clients may perceive a downgrade in status if a firm switches from corporate to individual ownership." She definitely wanted to avoid that. While I was standing, holding the forgotten college notebook, she stood up, seemingly very curious. "Did you come back to get that because you forgot it? Is it, by any chance, a study notebook for an exam?" I nodded. "Let me see." I was a bit embarrassed because I had been studying on my own with commercially available texts and materials borrowed from the library, not attending any school or courses. "It's fine. Let me see how you are doing it on your own." "But it's kinda." She quickly snatched the notebook from my hand and nodded in understanding as she looked through it. "You'll definitely make it in the real exam with this." I was somewhat shaken by her kind words, words she had never said before. Was she just being nice because she felt awkward after hearing the conversation she wasn't supposed to hear? Her kindness was only for that moment. From the next day, she treated me with even sharper, harsher eyes, even for my minor mistakes and blunders. I, considering it a patience until I start my own office, paid no attention and devoted myself to work, study for the exam, and searching for a life partner. Another half-year or so had passed. The search for a life partner was utterly unfruitful, but I passed the last subject of the tax accountant exam. I have more than 3 years of practical experience and can register as an accountant if I apply. We never had any end-of-year parties or office drinking parties, partly due to Lucy's policy. However, for some reason, on this day, We finished our work early and had a modest drinking party in the office. Catering and alcoholic beverages were provided. After everyone toasted with beer, Lucy slowly began to speak. "Everyone, thank you for always working hard." Lucy bowed deeply, and everyone responded accordingly. "Please, help yourselves to the food and listen while you eat." With that preamble, she started explaining the reason for hosting this drinking party. First, a certified tax accountant male employee who joined the office during incorporation is planning to leave soon. With his departure, Lucy will be the only accountant left, meaning the firm can't continue as a corporation. But that doesn't mean it will affect your conditions immediately. However, personally, I don't want to lose the corporate status. After saying this, she sent me her usual sharp look. To my surprise, I received an offer from someone unexpected. It's Sam. Then she announced that even after I register as an accountant, I would remain a tax accountant in this firm. Everyone in the room clapped, patted my shoulder joyfully, and shook my hand. I never said a word about staying in this firm. Confused and bewildered, I looked at her. She was smirking, a knowing smile on her face. "What was that all about earlier? I haven't heard anything, let alone been consulted by you." I confronted her after everyone had left following the party. "So, you don't want to be our company's tax accountant?" "No, I have my own life plan." Then, I explained it to her. "My goal is to become a tax accountant and to open my own office. Before setting up the office, I intend to find a spouse and start a family to appeal more to clients." "So, how are things currently?" "So I've passed the tax accountant exam. Now I just need to find a spouse. Then I'll marry you," she said, glaring at me coldly, abruptly, forcefully, and unilaterally. I blurted out, not knowing if it was a joke or what. I have the right to choose too." Then she immediately said, "Then choose me." As I was in a fluster, she continued, "Do you know why you were hired?" I shook my head sideways. Then she said, who seemingly looked down on the work of a tax accountant, intrigued her. She was interested in how many days I would last, how much I could do. But contrary to her expectations, despite my mistakes and failures, I managed to complete the tasks without giving up halfway and even passed the tax accountant exam. She herself always strived for perfection, but she said she always saw me as a natural and came to think that she could relax her shoulders more. It's been about 5 years. I was asked to speak at a lecture about my experiences leading up to becoming a tax accountant, something not typical of me. I pondered over what to talk about days before, earnestly wrote the manuscript, and just when I thought it was perfect and started the lecture, there was a man in the front row, snoring and dozing off. It got on my nerves, and I felt regret, but at the same time, I thought I should work harder so that people would want to hear me speak," she said with a shy smile. It rang a bell. Maybe that dozing man was me. Yes, it was, no doubt about it. She had realized during the interview that the man dozing off at the lecture was me. That's why I asked if you get tired easily. Remember, I was surprised, realizing that only now. Is the director the type to hold grudges? Can't you just say I have a good memory? And about calling me director, enough already. So, even now, as a tax accountant, I'm still working in her office. When I call her by her name at the office, I always get scolded afterward. And yet, she's the one who told me to stop calling her director. She says I can only call her by her first name at home. Because when I call her by her name, she reflexively replies with a sweet nasal darling. She says it affects her reputation as a representative employee if the subordinates see her embarrassing reaction. However, she doesn't realize I deliberately call her by her name during work when she is stressed with tasks or the atmosphere is too tense to change the mood.